Welcome everybody to this episode of Dauntless LeadHERship. We're happy you're here. And if it's your first time, really happy you're here. Just remember, please, to download, find us on your favorite platform, whether it's listening or watching us on YouTube, comment and share if you like what you hear. Today's episode is being recorded in October. And in October, as you know, I've wanted to focus on resilience and women's health because it's breast cancer awareness, and it turns out also pediatric cancer awareness month. And so this is something near and dear to my heart. So many of my friends and colleagues have suffered through cancer diagnoses, and the good news come out on the other side and built better, stronger, faster, and importantly, more focused lives for themselves. So we'll talk today with Katie Collins, who I'm honored to have with us on this podcast, and who was referred to me by some friends, the Rathkoffs, who just thought I would like to know her. And learning a bit about what her organization G2G does and her advocacy work, both governmental and corporate, they were absolutely right. So I want you to hear from her too. And I welcome to our podcast Katie Collins. A bit about her. She has nearly 20 years of experience working in the White House and with federal agencies, Congress, businesses, and nonprofit organizations. She currently serves as the vice president at G2G Consulting, where she manages their government affairs and strategic alliances, developing and executing legislative strategies to achieve meaningful policy changes with a focus on cancer and women's health. And I can't imagine a tougher time to be in a role like this, so I'm really eager to hear how she's doing what she's doing. Most recently, Katie served as the Director of Policy for ACT for the National Institute of Health, a nonprofit advocacy organization that works closely with Congress to make increasing biomedical research funding a national priority. During the Obama-Biden administration, Katie spent 6 years in the White House as Deputy Director of Operations in the Executive Residence, and I'm really interested to hear about that too. And then as Policy Associate on then Vice President Biden's Cancer Moonshot Task Force. She then helped launch the Biden Cancer Initiative and served as the program director, initiating and leading collaborations across industry and government to address gaps in cancer research and treatment systems. Katie also implemented strategic planning for the Department of Defense as a consultant for Booz Allen Hamilton, where she specialized in human capital management and business process reengineering. So impressive. Welcome, Katie.
Thank you so much for having me, Lisa. I'm really happy to be here.
So we're going to get started with the first question I ask guests who are with me for the first time, and that is, what does Dauntless mean to you?
I think what Dauntless means to me, other than the obvious definition of being unafraid to pursue your goals, is to be unafraid to pursue what's meaningful to you, to what's important to you, not necessarily what others expect you to pursue, but what you value, what's important to you, and what's going to be meaningful to you. That may not match others' definitions, but I think if you're doing something that's not true to yourself, your enjoyment and your satisfaction really suffers.
What's interesting to me is that this is not necessarily what comes up often in the definition of Dauntless, but we do hear how important it is for women to focus on authenticity, what their values are and what's meaningful to them in order for them to be great leaders. So I think it's really important for the audience to hear that. And I don't even know where to start. Should we start at the White House? Maybe tell us a bit about your career journey. What was it like working in the White House? And how should we be thinking about women's health and women's health initiatives now?
Well, working at the White House was in many ways a lucky accident for me. It is all about the power of networking. I was working for Booz Allen, working at the Pentagon, for the Army and the Air Force. When I happened to meet someone who thought I would be a good fit for a job they were hiring, in the executive residence. And before I knew it, I had an interview, and then another interview with Mrs. Obama, and then I got the job. And I think what was most thrilling for me about that position, was to be in the White House, in the center of history. I'm a history major with a side of political science, but I love history. I love American history. My thesis was on colonial history and British relations. And so being in that building every day, you could feel all the important things that came before you. And I felt that I was witnessing history while I was there. Things like the capture of Osama bin Laden, the awful day of the Sandy Hook shooting, the passage of the Affordable Care Act. All of those pieces happened, and I feel honored to have been able to witness them and to experience them, for better or for worse.
So you talked about getting into the White House through networking. We always talk about networking and how important it is. And more than ever, I think, as we are remote and it's hard to network sometimes, I think women need to focus on building their relationships. So clearly, it helped you get into the White House.
It
How
did.
has it helped you since then? And what do you recommend to emerging women leaders in terms of how to network and how to build up their network, especially if they're young moms and time is precious?
Well, I am a mom. I have two children. I have a 7-year-old and a 2-year-old. So I understand the constraints of time. I think sometimes we view networking a little too strictly, that networking has to be, going to some after work, cocktail event where you wear a name tag and have awkward conversations. And that can be that can be part of networking, and you never know who you're going to meet. But I think the other part of building your social network and is knowing more people, and that's doing things in your community, whether that's volunteering for an organization that's meaningful for you, whether that's taking an exercise class with a group of people, whether that's being out in your neighborhood at your farmer's market. I mean, I think about where I've met people, especially during my time in the DC area. And it doesn't have to be that strict networking event. I think it's being present in your community. And remembering that you never know who you're going to meet. I always like to think about my attitude when I talk to people. You never know who you're talking to, and what what relationship you could develop with that person, career or otherwise.
Right about here is where our listeners could be hearing your sponsorship message. Consider sponsoring Dauntless Leadership to reach our wonderful, motivated, talented listeners who are thinking about upping their leadership game in all walks of life. Reach them, if you like, by letting me know at lisa@lisa-kent.com. We'd love to have you. If I wanted to call this episode Leadership Lessons from the White House and Capitol Hill, what couple of things would you want to share that you've learned from policymakers, legislators, and powerful people on the Hill and in the White House that will help us be better leaders?
That's a really good question. I think when it comes to policy change, I've learned that being very focused on a specific goal or a specific metric is effective. I think that there's a lot of what you might call soft policy happening in Washington. A lot of people having ideas, a lot of people writing white papers, thinking about things. But often you don't see a direct change or a direct result. And that trying to change too many things all at once means you get nowhere on any of them. And so laying out a really specific goal that you'd like to achieve, and then perhaps, what comes after that. If your brain's in that space, I want to do this, and then this, and then this, and then this, and then seeing how they build upon each other and putting your work into knocking off that first policy change. Check, I've achieved that. Now it's on to the second. And being really deliberate in how you can measure that change. Because that's often the change that's most impactful.
So, setting goals, having clear metrics, and being systematic about your approach, making sure when you check it off, you do measure it, and then what is the next step to build upon that success. Those are great leadership lessons, policy or not, frankly. So, thank you for that. Although we didn't even call it networking, community clearly can be networking. And I think, especially as a mom, what you do with your children involves lots of other families too. And as you said, you never know who you're going to meet. And I like to say, when I was running my business, Illuminations, never burn any bridges either, because it may be that they're not at the current time at a place that's very helpful for you in terms of what you're doing next, work or otherwise, or something great for your children. We all move on, and you want to make sure that you're positive, not fake, authentic, but positive in those interactions and relationships. I want to go back to your work history, because I know now that you're working on women's health advocacy. Can you talk to me about how that came about and how you're doing it? And is it a very challenging environment? I mean, I was very optimistic for a long time about women's health and women's health funding. Maybe not as optimistic right now. So talk a little about that if you could.
Yeah, I mean, our company and the founder of our company, Liz Powell, has been involved in women's health for a while, since I joined the firm about 5 years ago. And I think, Women's Health Advocates, which is the group that we've started because of all the work we've been doing in women's health, came about because we were meeting so many amazing women in the healthcare field who were facing the same challenges, that research was underfunded, that there wasn't enough venture capital, that women's health innovations weren't able to get through FDA. If they did get through FDA, they were not able to be reimbursed through CMS. So, we had different companies, different groups who are all facing these same barriers, and looking to bring all of those voices together as one collective voice to really show the power of women, and to demonstrate that this women's health work is not a niche market. I think sometimes it gets dismissed as, oh, that's just women's health. But we are 52% of the population. We are often the head of our families, the CEO of our families, and pillars of our community. And so when women are healthy, our families are healthy, our communities are healthy. So I really see it as the opposite of a niche market, but something that everybody should care about. And then you're right, this is a bit of a difficult time, for health and research in general, with all of the funding cuts that we're seeing in the current administration. But I think the more that we continue to meet with policymakers, the more that we educate lawmakers, First about what is women's health, that women's health is not just reproductive health. Women's health is women's whole health, from head to toe. And that there's a lot we can do in a bipartisan manner when we work together. And so I think that education is continuing. Bipartisan leaders are interested in this and making progress on both sides of the aisle. So I'm optimistic about what we can continue to do when our voices are elevated.
How should we and our listeners be thinking about making a difference, getting involved? What would you like to see women in corporate America, women who may feel frustrated that they don't know how to act? What should we be thinking and doing? And have you been in a discussion with a policymaker where you've seen this glimmer of hope or this interest, and how did that conversation go?
Well, I would love if we have folks out there who are interested in advocacy when it comes to women's health, at any stage of the pipeline, to take a look at women's health advocates. I can share the website with Lisa. We do monthly calls, so anybody can, you can dial in and learn about what's going on. We have steering committee groups. We have particular policy area groups. So I do think there's a place for everybody, depending on, your expertise, and what you're interested in. And I think when it comes to where I've seen interest, on Capitol Hill, I would say menopause is one of the areas that has been getting a lot of airtime and a lot of positive response. It's one place where female members of Congress themselves have experienced, some of the challenges of menopause, maybe experienced some of the lack of education issues we have when meeting with a provider, and maybe experience some of the health challenges that go along with menopause, whether that's diagnosis of an autoimmune disorder, or a heart health challenge. So I think it's something that they've seen firsthand, and understand what it's about and want to make a change. So we've had a lot happening, with both Republicans and Democrats in the menopause space, which is fantastic. And I think we're getting there, with some other topics like endometriosis. There have been some discussions, even to the White House level about the challenges in being diagnosed and receiving the right treatment. So I think we're on an upward trajectory, as long as we keep working on this.
That's really encouraging to hear, and surprising, because I worked for a long time in sexual wellness and reproductive health, and menopause was never even discussed. And so in 2025, to hear that it's a
Literally.
hot topic on Capitol Hill, that's amazing. I also worry sometimes, though, that people think it's just a women's topic, and that they ascribe certain issues to menopause and pregnancy that are seen as, if not disabilities, holding women back. Because it is true, there might be a bit of a brain fog in either menopause and pregnancy, but I'm having had many menopausal women and many pregnant women working for me. I would take them any day. So how do we balance education about the real symptomology and the real, effects of some of these, I don't want to call them disease states because they're not, but conditions, with making sure that women are still seen as powerful at every stage of life?
Well, I think there's an economic argument in there too for why we need innovation to address some of these issues. Whether it's brain fog or hot flashes or trouble sleeping, and so you're not performing your best. We need to be doing something about it, and we can't do that without funding, without innovation, without that whole pipeline. And I think the more that we are talking about these things, I think the less it's seen as like a mystery women's issue that nobody can talk about. the better. So the more that it's out there in the open, the more, we empower women to be upfront with the challenges that they're dealing with. And, I agree with you. I think since becoming a mom, I've actually become a better employee, which, there are times when I've got a kid yelling in the background, or, I have to go and do pickup or drop off. But I've become incredibly efficient, ruthless with my time management, with prioritization. And so I think those skills that you learn in motherhood carry with you, and even if you're a woman who doesn't have kids, anybody who works with women, I think, sees the skills and some of the talents that we bring as a group to the workforce, and the issues, or the challenges that we face, whether that's pregnancy or fertility challenges or menopause, don't take away from the positives that we bring to our organization, to our colleagues.
So you reminded me that when I had young kids and I was newly a CEO of a tech company, and there were not a lot of women in tech, and I wrote an article called "What Parenthood Has Taught Me About Management," and it got published, and I see it pop up every once in a while, even today. I think that's so true, that not just motherhood, but parenthood teaches you how to be, as you said, ruthless, careful with priorities, focused, but also being able to juggle more than you ever thought that you could. And as I said, I would take a part-time mom any day, because part-time is usually not part-time, and that was the basis for my company, was flexible part-time work for women. And speaking of flexibility, your current job today and your consulting role, how much time are you spending in the corporate arena versus the government arena? And do you feel like G2G specifically gives you room to breathe and room to be a good parent? Can you talk about that? I'll put up, by the way, the women's advocacy link. For those who are watching us on YouTube, you'll see it. For those who are listening, it'll be in the notes section about the podcast. And also love to give a shout out to G2G and to Liz.
Yeah, so we specialize in government affairs, which is connecting, it can be businesses, it can be nonprofits, it can be universities, with government, and helping them use government to achieve your goals. Working with government, working to shape policy, working to shape funding streams, really can all be propellants in an upward direction. And so we work with all groups, and strategizing how best, to work productively with government. So we are a female founded and female owned company. We have female leadership. I'm really, really lucky, I think, that my boss, that Liz, is a mom of 3 boys. So she has been through the juggle, and has 2 school-aged boys still. So she's still in the midst of the juggle, of the drop off and the pickup, and I think recognizes that that's not a detractor from what a woman can bring to the workplace. It's just part of life and getting things done. So I think I feel lucky for that flexibility, but also lucky for that understanding. I don't, I've been in, a job before where maybe I didn't feel comfortable sharing that I was hiding in a bedroom because my baby was screaming in another room, and I didn't want someone to know, that's where I was, or that was the challenge. And so being able to be upfront with that, and share with other moms who are, facing those same issues is comforting and helpful, which I appreciate.
I had a colleague tell me back in my days at Johnson & Johnson, don't put your kids' artwork on the wall, because it will establish you as a mom and not a power player in strategy and marketing. Now, that was a long time ago, and I'm really happy to say that I think that would not be advice that I would get today. And if anybody gets that advice, that's not the right place to be, I think. You mentioned authenticity earlier. I don't see how or why you would want to hide that fact. And if you need to, it doesn't probably make sense to be there. In your experience, I want to flip back to cancer for a moment. The Cancer Moonshot was an incredible initiative, and I think a lot of progress was made toward basically eliminating cancer, making cancer a chronic condition versus a terminal condition. And I'm wondering, where does that stand today, and how are you feeling about things? I happen to do a lot in the world of oncology. I have a son that works for the New Jersey Cancer Institute. Where are we overall as a society with cancer?
I think we're in a much better place than we were, 10, 15 years ago. I think one of the amazing things about the Cancer Moonshot, and there's now been, a second iteration of the Cancer Moonshot during, President Biden's term in office, was really harnessing all of the different aspects of government to make progress in the space. It put funding towards cancer. It put funding towards programming. And it really galvanized the private sector as well. So you had kind of all of the innovators from both the public and the private side, innovating together. And I think one of the things that the Cancer Moonshot did really well, both the first moonshot that I was a part of and then the moonshot in the, most recent administration, was always keeping the patient and patient experience and patient needs at the center of their work. President Biden had the experience of being a dad of a son with cancer, of knowing what families go through and knowing the challenges that accompany a cancer diagnosis for someone that you love. And I think all of those experiences shaped the work that went into all of his efforts in cancer, which is really, really valuable. But just to see the improvements that we've made, from in diagnosis, the improvements that we've made in treatment. You talked a bit about October being Pediatric Cancer Month. Looking at the past 30 years, what the National Cancer Institute's Children's Oncology Group has done for data sharing in pediatric cancer has reduced deaths in the pediatric cancer space by 80%. It's huge. So I think it's a great example of what can happen when government, shows its hand. This is what we care about, and private industry gets involved, and everybody rows their boat in the same direction.
That's amazing to hear. 80% reduction. I wanted to ask you about a typical day for you today. What do you spend your time doing? Are you a lobbyist? Would you call yourself a lobbyist? And for those of us who are not experienced in that area, what do you do? How do you prepare your remarks? And then would you recommend the field for women? Why or why not?
So I am a registered lobbyist, and all that really means is disclosing that I am advocating on behalf of a particular piece of legislation. So I could, if all I did on Capitol Hill was talk about general policies, we need more funding for women's health, we need more funding for cancer. That's not considered lobbying. But once I say, please pass this particular bill, it crosses the threshold into lobbying. I really enjoy government affairs. I really enjoy public policy. I think it took me a little bit of time to find it. I went to Dartmouth, and everybody at Dartmouth, at least so it seemed to me, and so it seemed from visiting the Career Services Center there, either became a lawyer or a doctor, or if you had like a perfect GPA, then, McKinsey maybe, or Bain would hire you. And I had a good GPA, but not a perfect GPA. And I really liked science, but I was not going to be a pre-med person. And so I thought the only career that I could choose was to be a lawyer. So my very first job was in a law firm, and I had a really good experience, but did not leave that thinking that I should be a lawyer. Hence my time at Booz Allen, where I did get some government experience and the management consulting side. But that's, how I found my way to the White House and to public policy. So I wish I'd, maybe learned about it a little bit earlier and could have done some work when I was younger. But I do really enjoy it. I'm very lucky that I think I get to be a lobbyist only for issues that make the world a better place that I care about. I think lobbying can have a picture of a bunch of guys, smoking cigars and, selling evil corporations. But, I work on healthcare, I work on innovation, and how can we elevate companies and nonprofits to change the world for the better. And what it takes to be a good lobbyist, I would say, is enjoying talking to people, enjoying building relationships, enjoying maintaining relationships. And that's kind of the people person side of it. But then on the more technical side, is finding a policy area that you're interested in. I always loved science in school. I used to be a figure skater. I was on the U.S. national figure skating team when I was a teenager, and I thought I wanted to be a sports med doctor, and really had a hard time with the pre-med classes, but took a lot of science and enjoyed science. And so health policy has really been a place where I feel like I can explore that interest from a different lens. And explore it from a patient accessibility perspective, which is, maybe not caring for someone, in a doctor's office, but also helping people get the care they need in a different way.
Maybe in a larger way, impacting whole populations of patients. And I think for me, I too chickened out at organic chemistry, thought I
Me too.
was going to be a doctor, and now I'm an EMT, so I help in a little way. But I feel like understanding that there are many roads to success is important. And I don't know if it's different. I spent a lot of time with friends at Dartmouth too, in terms of career services. But I love that you're accessible to current students. And I would say to people who are listening who are still in school, reach out to alums. I guarantee there's somebody doing maybe something that's interesting to you. And we rarely say no. I mean, it's kind of in our nature to want to help pull others up with us. And that's one of my themes for women in leadership. It's our duty to pull others up with us. So educate them, tell them about the career path, and maybe, create a little opportunity for them if you can. And for those who are on the looking side, the seeking side, don't be shy to ask. What's the worst that can happen? Somebody says no, and you move on. Okay, switching gears a little bit. Sounds like you have loved working with Liz. Who are some of the great leaders you've worked with, and what have been the skills or the talents or the characteristics that have inspired you?
I think one of the things that I've seen Liz do that is not always how I've been led in the past that I really appreciate is inclusivity. Maybe a lack of hierarchy in terms of being exposed to the higher level parts of the job. I think it's really great, when we have big meetings on Capitol Hill, we often bring in one of our interns with us, or a more junior person on the team to be able to learn. I think that you don't learn without being able to have those experiences. And I've been on the side of being shut out from something And it's the very opposite of motivating. I think it is motivating for our, younger employees to be able to see kind of the end game, what all of the work is going into. So that's one thing that I really enjoy about Liz's leadership and have learned from her. And another, having worked directly for President Obama and Vice President Biden, I feel like I've learned a lot from them. And I think one of the experiences that I think about when I think about my work with President Obama is a time when he got upset with me when we had a big high profile event and there was something that did not go as planned, and he didn't yell at me, but he told me he was really disappointed in me because he knew that I was capable of doing better. And it was a piece of the project that I didn't really have the expertise to have fixed. Like, it wasn't something that I would have gone in and fixed. So I think my immediate reaction was that wasn't my fault. And his response was, but you were in charge and it was your team and it went wrong. And so it is your fault. And that really showed me that the strength of the team underneath you is really important. And that being a leader isn't just the credentials of being able to be in charge, but is ensuring that your team is executing down to the smallest detail. Because if something goes wrong, it's not that person's fault. It's your fault that you're accountable. And I'm really thankful. I cried a whole lot that night when he was out of the room, but I'm really thankful for learning that lesson.
I wrote a book called Leveraging Leadership, and in it I say, and you literally just said the same thing. Great leaders don't take any of the credit for good work and take all of the blame for bad work. And you really don't just take the blame, you own the blame. And that's what you're saying. Ownership is important. And I also heard you say inclusivity, exposure, and seeing the whole picture, the end game. That leaders who are able to open up those vistas are inspiring people. And I think that makes a lot of sense. And of course, choosing the right people to surround yourself with. And you don't always have the power to choose, but knowing with whom to associate and who to pull onto your team so that you have success, and trusting your instincts. That's another thing that, I feel that even young women have a good sense of who's going to get this done, who's going to figure it out with me. And those are the people that you want to ask to be on your team shamelessly, even if you have to say, I need you, which is a hard thing sometimes for women and anybody becoming a leader to do. So do you educate yourself by listening to podcasts, reading books? Is there anything that you would want me to recommend to our audience?
So I am guilty of having young children in a stage where I am honestly not doing a ton of book reading, which is kind of sad because I've always loved to read. A lot of my work is staying up to date on the news and the policy, especially in the healthcare space. So I do a lot of reading, in particular on healthcare. But I think if I do pick up a book these days, it is not a nonfiction. It's likely to be an escape for me. So I love historical fiction. I really enjoy historical fiction, and then sometimes some nonfiction in the history space. I am very slowly reading Hamilton. I saw Hamilton twice again this summer. It had been a while, and got into that story. And then when it comes to podcasts, my guilty pleasure is the Bachelor franchise and Bachelor podcasts. So that's usually while I'm, exercising or cleaning the house. So I read a lot of news for the most part, which is kind of boring.
I don't think it's boring, and I think anybody who's reading Hamilton is doing it really, really slowly because it's dense. But have you read Frozen River?
It's on my bookshelf. It's got the girl in the red coat on it, right? On the cover, because my aunt sent it to my mom, who loved it, who passed it to me, but I have not opened it yet.
Well, I recommend it, but I'll also say, as a mom shuttling kids around, you may want to listen to it as opposed to reading it. I am not typically a big fan of historical fiction, but my book club was reading it and I read it, and it's a true story embellished of a midwife in the late 1800s in the Massachusetts area. I did not know it was a true story until the end. I definitely recommend it if you like historical fiction, women's health, and maybe listen to it. And she reads it, actually, the author, versus trying to actually put a book in front of you and read it. And actually, I'll put Frozen River up too. That will be my recommendation, along with The Bachelor. And I think everybody needs a guilty pleasure, especially if you're really head down in the news. You definitely need something to escape with. All right. What was the best advice somebody gave you as you were developing your career, becoming the leader that you are, that you might want to share?
I think one of the pieces of advice that I think about often, so I don't know if it's the best advice, but it stayed with me, is to pay attention to everything that's going on in your work. I think we're in a phase of life, and we have been and will continue to be, where we're really busy. There's more things on our to-do list than there is time to do them. And so sometimes the inclination can be to tune out if it's not something that's like directly affecting what you need to produce. Is like, I can like half pay attention to that. But I can't tell you the amount of times that, I will come across a project or a deliverable now and think about something 5 or 6 years ago. Oh, I can use this as inspiration or template. Or, I remember when my teammate worked on this project, and, doing it this way would be helpful. So that as much as you can be a sponge and soak up everything that's going on around you, the better. That those are things that as you rise through your career, that as you grow into a more sophisticated role, you'll think about, oh, I remember that project, and now I can use some of that to help me move something else forward.
You've given some good advice, and I think that's important. In the world of consulting, I think that's how you bring solutions, is you look at unrelated things and suddenly there's an aha that brings them together in a way that's helpful to the client. Is there anything, Katie, that I didn't ask you that you want to make sure we talk about on the podcast?
Well, I just want to thank you for spotlighting women's health, for spotlighting the work that's going on in the cancer space, especially in breast cancer and in pediatrics. Those are all worthy areas of attention. And would just urge your listeners, if there's a particular place that you're passionate and that you'd like to be involved, to reach out. We're really excited about this movement that we're building in the women's health space. Cancer is a part of that. There's an arm that sits under women's health advocates, called the Breast Cancer Early Detection Coalition, focused on expanding access to diagnostics for women, particularly with dense breasts, where a mammogram may not be sufficient to detect cancer. So we're looking to add more voices to the chorus that's working for change in those areas. So thanks, Lisa, for giving some time to talk about them.
Thank you, Katie. And I will make sure, as I said, that I post how to get involved. And just a reminder to everyone, find what matters to you and get involved some way in letting the people who are making policy know why it's important, and you as a constituent of that person, why it's important to you. And I'll close today's podcast by mentioning, in the immortal words of my mom, Arlene Barnett, you don't have to know what you're going to be when you grow up, just what you're going to do next. Thank you, and please come back.
Thank you so much for having me, Lisa. I appreciate it.